Welcome to episode 83 of the Perrysburg Podcast. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. The Perrysburg Podcast is a resource for Perrysburg residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Our website is perrysburgpodcast.com. Today, we are talking about Orleans Park. I finally learned how to say the name of this park correctly. It is Orleans Park. Orleans Park is a city park located along the Maumee River. It's very popular with fishermen, so this park is about to see its peak season. As I record this, it is late February 2025, and the annual walleye run is right around the corner. It starts around March 1st. The address for your GPS is 655 Maumee Western Reserve Road, Perrysburg, Ohio. As you approach the Perrysburg-Maumee Bridge from the Perrysburg side, the main entrance to Orleans Park is on your right. You can also get to Orleans Park from westbound West Front Street. I know that's a mouthful. So before you get to that light right before the bridge, turn right. You go down a steep hill. It's, I believe, officially labeled West Boundary Street. Again, you can only access this other entrance from westbound West Front Street right before that stoplight. I call it the secret entrance, and I would not actually recommend that you use it. I discovered it because I was curious one day, hey, where does this road go? And I found it. But the reason that you shouldn't use it is because that secret entrance is not the most direct path to the parking lots. Most people drive to get there. So if you use the secret entrance, you would have to drive past the wastewater treatment facility to get to the parking lots. It's less convenient, and dare I say, it does not smell that great either. Now that you know where Orleans Park is, let's talk about the features. There are 2 parking lots. One lot is at that main entrance along Maumee Western Reserve Road, and the other parking lot is along the river. That second lot along the river is so far away from the main road and that main parking lot that most people don't even know it's there. If you do not need access to the river, you probably will not need that second parking lot. Now, if you have a disability placard, there are accessible parking spaces in both parking lots. My 2 favorite features of Orleans Park are the boat launch and access to the Riverwalk. Let's talk about the boat launch first. You can launch your watercraft at no cost at the Orleans Park boat launch. Please note that Orleans Park boat launch is shallow, so it's great for launching a kayak or a canoe and maybe even a jet ski, but I would not necessarily launch a motorboat there. Use your judgment, water levels vary. My family owns a tandem kayak, that's a 2-seat kayak. It's a sit-on-top kayak. And we have launched our kayak at Orleans Park more times than I can count. It is a great place to launch a kayak. Back when I moved to Perrysburg back in 2007, I used to see some signs along the side of the road that said jet ski launch. I don't remember seeing many jet skis trying to use the launch at Orleans Park, but I don't sit back there and watch the boat launch. So just so you know, it is a known jet ski launch as well. Use your judgment if you need to launch a motorboat. And on the topic of motorboats, there are several parking spaces for boat trailers at Orleans Park. If you have a motorboat and the water looks low over at Orleans Park, head over to the Maple Street boat launch. The Maple Street boat launch is generally considered better for launching a boat because the water's usually deeper over there. By the way, the Orleans Park and Maple Street boat launches were mentioned in episode 55 of the Perrysburg Podcast. I've got a link to that episode in the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. Also, on the topic of kayaks and canoes, the city of Perrysburg rents kayak and canoe storage spaces at Orleans Park, right by that boat launch. They provide the chains, you provide the lock, and the kayak or the canoe, of course. Rental cost is $35 for the 2025 season. To learn more about renting a kayak or canoe storage space at Orleans Park, visit the City of Perrysburg's website. Marie Dunn over at the City of Perrysburg Public Information Officer, does a great job. The website has a kayak or canoe rental space agreement right there on the website. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. If you're wondering, Kim, have you ever rented a storage space at Orleans Park? Well, yes, I have. Before the pandemic, I used to rent a storage space. Back more than 5 years ago, it was $25 for the season. Now it's up to $35. I'm not complaining. I had a great experience, and it was super convenient to store my kayak right there next to the boat launch. Why don't I rent a space over there anymore? It's because I like to travel around to the various parks and boat launches in the area. I have a pickup truck now, and it's super easy for me to get around. Back when I had a minivan, I preferred to just leave the kayak right there at Orleans Park, right next to the boat launch, because it was just convenient. Let's move on to my other favorite feature of Orleans Park. It is access to the Riverwalk. The Riverwalk is a paved, multi-purpose trail along the Maumee River on the Perrysburg side. The Riverwalk connects the lower Fort Meigs battlefield area to Orleans Park. The city of Perrysburg is also working on extending that Riverwalk to Riverside Park and Hood Park. Actually, the trail is paved from the wastewater treatment facility to Riverside Park and Hood Park. So a good chunk of it is done. It looks to me like the only thing they have left to do is to pave from Orleans Park parking lot through the woods to where the trail is already paved over by the wastewater treatment facility. If you have not seen this multi-purpose path yet, which I call the Riverwalk, you need to check it out. The city has done a really good job with it, in my opinion. The path is asphalt, it's paved very level and very nice. It's very wide. There's plenty of room for runners and bikers both to go in both directions. Very wide, very nice. That does it for my two favorites, the boat launch and the Riverwalk. Now let's talk about access to the river for fishing. Orleans Park is very popular with fishermen, women, and children. They're all out there in the spring. It's super easy to get out into the river from that second parking lot, the one that's right along the river. During the walleye run, which starts around March 1st every year, you will see a ton of activity at Orleans Park. Parking spaces pretty much full, people in hip waders making their way to the river. It's pretty cool. And then if you go all the way back to that parking lot in the back, you will see people lined up pretty much shoulder to shoulder, standing in the river. And as you stand there on the Perrysburg side, you can look across and see people doing the same thing on the Maumee side. Speaking of fishing, if you need any fishing gear, Maumee Tackle is maybe a quarter of a mile away from Orleans Park on the Maumee side. To learn more about Maumee Tackle, visit maumeetackle.net. And if you're from out of town and you don't know how to spell Maumee, it's the name of the city across the river from Perrysburg. It's Maumee, Maumee. So that's maumeetackle.net. At this point, I'm going to share just a handful of smaller features of Orleans Park. In the parking areas, there are fishing line recycling tubes, porta potties, trash cans, a picnic table at the main parking lot, and some signage. The last feature that I'll mention is the hills. The hills are not very big or very long, but some people like to sled at Orleans Park in the winter. Again, the hills aren't very steep or long, but some people do like sledding at Orleans Park. That does it for the features of Orleans Park. If you are interested in fishing, kayaking, canoeing, or walking along the Maumee River, you need to visit Orleans Park. And that does it for episode 83 of the Perrysburg Podcast. You can find the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. In the show notes, you will find a link to Orleans Park on the City of Perrysburg's website, a link to the other parks previously featured on the Perrysburg Podcast, a link to Maumee Tackle, and more. If you would like to be notified by email each time a new episode of the Perrysburg Podcast comes out, sign up for the newsletter on perrysburgpodcast.com. You can also subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg Podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Share this episode with your park-loving friends. Thank you for listening today, and I'll talk to you next week.